Once the stack creation process finishes correctly, you can check in the Outputs tab the following values. The private URL to access the Denodo Solution Manager. Note that the application takes some time to start, so you may need to wait for a couple of minutes before the link works correctly. You may get a connection error or a 404 not found error if you try to access it before the service has completely started. You can also find the URL to access additional documentation. In this URL, you can find links to additional resources, and you can also download the VDP administration tool, which is needed for some administrative tasks of Denodo, and the instance ID of the launch instance. This value is the default password that allows access to the Solution Manager administration tool for the admin user. We highly recommend that you change the default admin user and its auto-generated password as soon as possible. In this manual, you can find a link to the Denodo documentation explaining how to do it. Then, keep in mind the following information. The instance is launched with or without public IP depending on the setting of the selected subnet for the auto-assign IP settings. You can access the instance using the private IP displayed in the Output tab if there is connectivity between your network and the VPC in AWS due to the use of a VPN or another networking solution. And if you launch the instance in a public subnet and you want to access the instance using the public IP, you can do so checking the public IP for the instance in the EC2 console and replacing the value of the private IP with the public one. So now, let's try to access the Solution Manager Web Admin tool and the URL for the additional resources. We need to open new tabs and copy these URLs, the one for the additional resources and the one for the Solution Manager instance. Then we need to open the EC2 dashboard. We need to go now to the instance running section, and here we can check the public IP for the Denodo Solution Manager instance. So we need to copy this IP and replace the value of the IP in this URL. Here we can see the page with the additional resources and also the instructions on how to install the VDP client. And if we replace this private IP with the public one, we can see now here the login page of the Solution Manager. To log in, we will use the predefined admin user. Remember that the default auto-generated password for this admin user is the instance ID of the Solution Manager instance. So we need to go back to the creation stack screen and copy the instance ID of the Solution Manager instance. Then we can use this instance ID as the password for the admin user. The first time you log in the Solution Manager administration tool, you will be asked to introduce the AWS credentials of your account. You can find in the Denodo Automated Cloud Mode Quick Start Guide how you can create the credentials and the permissions needed. You can also provide these credentials later in the Configuration Automated Mode AWS screen. For more information, check the Denodo AWS configuration documentation. Now, I will set here my access key ID and key ID. The Denodo Solution Manager 8.0 standard has 3 preloaded environments and clusters: development, staging, and production. In order to access the Environments and Clusters Overview screen, select the option Environments Overview in the main menu. This opens the Overview screen. You can also see on the left side of this screen the Solution Manager catalog tree with the 3 predefined environments and clusters. As you can see, all the predefined clusters are initially in the cluster needs to be recreated status, so they are predefined but not created yet. Each environment has a default configuration. For instance, if we open the development environment, you can see the predefined name. It has also assigned the corresponding license scenario, in this case development, and it is by default in the same region and VPC as the Solution Manager instance. Regarding clusters, each cluster has also a default configuration, a name again, the same key pair and subnet as the Solution Manager instance, and one instance of virtual data port and another instance of the Node scheduler with different settings for the instance type, the EVS storage, the security group, and the instance name prefix, among others. Now we'll try to recreate a cluster with the default configuration. To do so, we need to go back to the Overview tab. Before creating any cluster, we recommend always you open and check the values configured for all the predefined environments and clusters, and adjust them to fit your needs. For instance, we can also check the staging environment and cluster. We can see here the default configuration for the staging environment, AWS region, VPC, etc. And if we open the staging cluster, we can also see the default configuration, key pair, subnet, etc. Now, if we go back to the Overview tab, we can create and launch a cluster by simply selecting the Recreate option in the Actions column for the corresponding cluster. On the next screen, the Node components to be installed are shown: Virtual Data Port and Scheduler. Then, click on the Recreate button. After this, you can check the cluster creation progress by clicking on the corresponding last action. To complete the process, we need to also wait for the services to be started. Finally, the cluster with their corresponding instances have been created and the services have also been started.